The failure began before anyone noticed it, embedded in the gap between scheduled dispatch and actual departure from regional distribution centers serving the Las Vegas metropolitan area. On a Tuesday in mid-March, inventory replenishment orders generated overnight by automated systems at retail locations across the city triggered standard fulfillment sequences at warehouses in North Las Vegas, Henderson, and facilities near the I-15 corridor. These orders reflected predictable depletion patterns from Monday sales activity, with thresholds crossed in categories including bottled water, packaged snacks, over-the-counter medications, and ambient grocery staples. The system calculated required quantities, assigned them to outbound delivery routes, and scheduled departure windows between 4 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. to ensure arrival during receiving hours at destination stores. But the trucks that were supposed to leave in that window did not. Warehouse staffing was complete, loading equipment was operational, and dock assignments were current, but coordination between order consolidation, pallet staging, and vehicle assignment extended beyond planned timelines. A picking sequence that normally required 90 minutes took 2 hours and 17 minutes. Route assembly that typically concluded by 5:45 a.m. was not finished until 7:20 a.m. The delays were not caused by equipment failure or absent workers, but by small inefficiencies in sequencing and minor variances in pallet location that compounded across multiple simultaneous operations. Trucks eventually departed, but the margin that normally absorbed traffic variability and minor route adjustments had already been consumed before vehicles left the facility.
Morning traffic into and through Las Vegas on that Tuesday was ordinary by volume, but unforgiving in flow, and the late departure from distribution centers placed delivery vehicles into congestion windows they were normally scheduled to avoid. Interstate 15 southbound experienced standard density between 7 a.m. and 8:45 a.m. as commuter and commercial traffic moved toward the Central Corridor and Resort District. Surface routes, including Charleston Boulevard, Tropicana Avenue, and Flamingo Road, carried typical loads, with minor incidents near intersections causing localized slowdowns that dissipated within minutes but created cumulative delay for vehicles caught in sequence. The trucks carrying restocking inventory were now traveling during peak exposure rather than in the pre-dawn clearance period their schedules assumed. A route that normally required 32 minutes from warehouse to first delivery point took 51 minutes. A delivery sequence designed to complete 6 stops in 2 hours and 15 minutes was recalculated in real time by drivers who recognized that the timing was no longer achievable within the original window. Traffic did not stop the deliveries, but it extended them beyond the tolerances that retail receiving departments had structured their own operations around. Stores expecting delivery between 6:30 a.m. and 8 a.m. to allow restocking before mid-morning customer volume did not receive trucks until after 9 a.m., and in some cases after 10 a.m., when floor staff were already engaged with sales activity and receiving capacity was split between unloading and customer service.
Retail locations across Las Vegas operated standard morning procedures, opening doors, staffing registers, and managing initial customer flow while waiting for anticipated deliveries that had not yet arrived. Receiving docks at grocery stores, pharmacies, convenience outlets, and general merchandise locations were staffed according to schedules that assumed delivery completion by mid-morning, allowing personnel to transition from unloading and verification to stocking and floor replenishment. When trucks arrived later than scheduled, the labor allocated to receiving was either reduced because workers had moved to other tasks or stretched thinner because the same personnel were now managing both delayed shipments and customer-facing responsibilities. A grocery store on West Sahara Avenue received a delivery at 10:47 a.m. that was scheduled for 7:15 a.m., but only one staff member was available to process the shipment because 2 others had been reassigned to checkout lanes and restocking of produce sections that were already showing visible depletion. Unloading the truck took 43 minutes instead of the planned 22 minutes, and verification of received quantities against order manifests was abbreviated to maintain pace, introducing discrepancies that would later require reconciliation. Similar compressions occurred at locations throughout the city, where receiving windows designed for sequential processing were now overlapping with operational periods intended for customer service. The trucks were unloaded, but the contents remained in back rooms and staging areas rather than moving directly to sales floors, creating a secondary delay between physical receipt and inventory availability. The automated inventory systems that tracked stock levels and triggered replenishment orders operated on update cycles that did not immediately reflect goods sitting in back rooms or still in transit. Point-of-sale data captured items sold throughout the morning and updated stock counts in near real time, but the corresponding arrival of replacement inventory was recorded only after formal check-in procedures were completed and entered into facility management systems. At many locations, the late-arriving deliveries were received physically but not processed digitally until later in the day, creating a gap between actual on-site inventory and what the system understood to be available. A pharmacy chain with 11 locations in the Las Vegas area showed depletion alerts for multiple high-turnover items by 11:30 a.m., but several of those items were already present in unopened shipments and storage areas, waiting for staff to complete intake documentation and move products to dispensing stock. The system, seeing continued depletion without corresponding replenishment confirmation, generated secondary orders for the following day, creating potential overstock conditions that would only become apparent after the backlog was processed. Meanwhile, sales floors continued to empty because the inventory that existed on premises had not yet been made accessible to customers. The failure was not in supply, but in the temporal coordination between receipt, recording, and deployment of goods within the retail environment.
Staff assigned to restock shelves throughout Las Vegas retail locations worked from prioritization systems that directed them toward high-visibility, high-turnover categories, but the usual rhythm of restocking was disrupted by both delayed deliveries and compressed receiving operations. Items that normally arrived early and were restocked during low traffic periods were now arriving during active shopping hours, requiring floor staff to navigate customer activity while moving product from back areas to shelves. The process was slower, more fragmented, and more frequently interrupted than standard procedures anticipated. A grocery store on East Tropicana Avenue had restocking labor scheduled in 2-hour blocks starting at 6 a.m., with expectations that beverages, dairy, and packaged goods would be replenished before 10 a.m. When the delivery arrived at 9:52 a.m. and was not fully unloaded until 10:35 a.m., the restocking window had collapsed and staff were dividing attention between answering customer questions, managing checkout overflow, and attempting to restock sections that were now noticeably sparse. Priority was given to items with the highest depletion visibility, but even those restocking efforts were partial, with shelves receiving enough product to reduce the appearance of emptiness without being fully replenished to planogram standards. Lower priority items, including some shelf-stable groceries and non-essential merchandise, were deferred entirely, remaining in backstock or on rolling carts in staging areas. The stores did not close sections or turn customers away, but the continuous replenishment cycle that normally kept shelves full had been interrupted, and the gap widened as the day progressed.
By early afternoon, the visible depletion across retail locations in Las Vegas had become more pronounced, not because of unusual demand, but because restocking had not kept pace with ordinary consumption. Shelves that were typically maintained at 70 to 80% capacity were now showing 50% or lower in multiple categories, and some specific items had sold out entirely despite the presence of additional stock still in back rooms or not yet transferred from receiving areas. Bottled water sections at convenience stores showed gaps where 12-packs and 24-packs had been removed by customers throughout the morning without replacement. Snack aisles at grocery stores displayed irregular spacing and missing facings where popular items had depleted faster than restocking labor could address. Pharmacy locations had reduced availability in analgesics, allergy medications, and first aid supplies, with some products entirely absent from shelves, even though inventory records indicated partial stock on site. The depletion was distributed unevenly, affecting high-traffic stores more than peripheral locations, and impacting categories with faster turnover more than slower-moving goods. Customers adapted by substituting similar items, choosing alternative brands, or deferring purchases, but the aggregate effect was a reduction in transaction completeness and an increase in out-of-stock encounters. The retail system remained operational, but its responsiveness to consumption had degraded, and the usual buffer of immediately available inventory had eroded. Distribution centers serving the Las Vegas area processed secondary dispatch sequences in the afternoon, fulfilling orders generated earlier in the day and preparing deliveries scheduled for the following morning. But the operational tempo did not include capacity for same-day correction of missed or delayed replenishment. The warehouses operated on planned cycles with fixed labor allocation, vehicle routing, and loading schedules that did not accommodate unplanned additional outbound shipments within the same business day. Orders triggered by morning depletion were queued for fulfillment in the next standard dispatch window, typically beginning late evening for overnight delivery or early the following morning. Some facilities had protocols for emergency restocking in cases of critical shortages, but those protocols required explicit activation by retail management and were not triggered by the general depletion occurring across the city, which was characterized as delayed rather than critical. A regional distribution center in North Las Vegas processed 127 replenishment orders from Las Vegas area stores on Tuesday afternoon, consolidating them into delivery routes scheduled for Wednesday pre-dawn departure. The system functioned as designed, but it did not recognize or respond to the fact that many of the items being ordered for Wednesday delivery were already present at destination stores, waiting in back rooms for processing, or that the depletion prompting the orders was a function of stocking delay rather than actual inventory absence. The gap between physical stock and system visibility persisted, and secondary orders were prepared without awareness of the mismatch. As Tuesday evening arrived, retail stores across Las Vegas continued normal operations with visibly reduced shelf stock in multiple categories, and restocking efforts that had been deferred or fragmented during the day did not fully recover before closing hours. Evening shifts at many locations included partial restocking, with staff moving some backroom inventory to sales floors, but the volume of delayed product and the competing demands of evening customer traffic meant that full replenishment was not achieved. A grocery store on South Decatur Boulevard had 3 pallets of shelf-stable goods still in the receiving area at 8 p.m., items that had arrived late morning but had not been prioritized for stocking during the day. Staff managed to restock approximately 60% of the delayed inventory by closing time, focusing on items with the highest visibility and customer demand, but the remaining 40% was left staged for the overnight crew. Similar conditions existed at other locations, where closing inventory levels were lower than typical for a Tuesday, not because of supply failure, but because the temporal coordination of delivery, receiving, and stocking had been disrupted enough that normal throughput was not maintained. The stores locked doors with shelves that looked more like late-week depletion than midweek stock levels, and the gap between expected and actual availability had widened over the course of the day without a clear resolution point. Overnight crews at Las Vegas retail locations worked through remaining backstock, processed delayed shipments, and attempted to restore shelf conditions to standard levels before Wednesday morning openings, but the effort was constrained by available labor and the volume of deferred restocking from the previous day. The crews operated on fixed schedules with predetermined task lists, and the additional workload created by Tuesday's delays was absorbed by prioritizing high-impact categories and accepting incomplete restocking in lower priority areas. A 24-hour pharmacy location on Maryland Parkway had overnight staff complete stocking of over-the-counter medications, bottled beverages, and personal care items, but deferred restocking of household goods and seasonal merchandise that had lower turnover velocity. The goal was to ensure that Wednesday morning customers encountered adequately stocked core categories, even if overall inventory presentation remained below standard. Inventory systems updated overnight as received goods were formally entered and backstock was moved to active locations, reducing the gap between physical inventory and system records, but some discrepancies remained where receiving documentation had been abbreviated or delayed. The overnight processing mitigated but did not eliminate the restocking deficit from Tuesday, and Wednesday morning inventory levels were improved but not fully restored to the baseline that would have existed if Tuesday's replenishment had proceeded on schedule. In the days following the Tuesday restocking disruption, retail operations teams and logistics coordinators across the Las Vegas market compiled incident reports, reviewed timeline data, and analyzed the sequence of delays that had prevented normal replenishment cycles from completing as designed.
The documentation identified dispatch delays at distribution centers, traffic-related delivery compression, receiving window mismatches, inventory latency between physical receipt and system updates, and labor constraints during restocking as contributing factors, but no single element was determined to be the primary cause. The disruption was characterized as a coordination failure rather than a component failure, where multiple small variances in timing and sequencing combined to push the system beyond its operational margins. Automated replenishment thresholds were reviewed to assess whether sensitivity adjustments could reduce latency between depletion detection and restocking response, and warehouse dispatch procedures were examined for opportunities to increase buffer time and scheduling. Inventory update protocols at store level were discussed as potential targets for acceleration, reducing the gap between physical receipt and system recognition of available stock. The reviews referenced design assumptions about delivery windows, receiving capacity, and restocking throughput that had proven insufficient when subjected to cumulative delay rather than isolated variance. Planning models were updated to incorporate wider tolerance ranges for dispatch timing and delivery sequencing, and contingency protocols for same-day restocking were proposed for evaluation, though implementation timelines and cost implications were noted as requiring further analysis before operational changes could be approved.